18. And we finished with Samson and so on. The rest of the book, 17 through 21, in fact, apparently took place earlier. They're not chronological. It's most likely some of the events we're going to read about occurred probably prior to, with Samson and all of that, 13 through 16. The movements of the tribe of Dan that we're going to see in chapter 18 doesn't fit the scenario if the Philistines were as strong as they were during the days of Samson. And they were that strong. In fact, they stayed strong until, of course, the time of Saul and David and so on, which they're finally contained. The war against Benjamin that we're going to see in the later chapters also would have been impossible if the Philistines had been in charge. So chapter 17 to 21 seem to be added by the writer at the end, sort of as a capsule of just how confused and wicked the people had become. It's not as if the chronology, as if they're events themselves that are that profound, as much as making the point that the chronicler has been making all along. There are three areas in life in which there was rampant confusion in Israel: the home, the ministry, and the national social order. And God established all three institutions early in the chapter of Genesis. He established the home, human government, and of course the worshiping community. Israel under the Old Covenant and the church under the New Covenant. And on the first of these, both in time but also in significance, is the home. And that's what we're really going to sort of focus on here in chapter 17. See, when God wedded Eve to Adam, he really established a foundation that's for all social institutions. When that foundation crumbles, then things really begin to fall apart. So we're going to go right on in to chapter 17. And I'm just going to sort of subtitle this, Confusion in the Home. And there was a man of Mount Ephraim whose name was Micah. Now, the name Micah means who is like Yahweh or Jehovah. This guy certainly did not honor the Lord. He may have thought he was, but he's pretty confused. It's ironic, in fact, that a guy by the name of Micah would establish an apostate shrine in his home with an unlawful priesthood. That's basically what's going to unfold here. He had a family, but not much is said about his family. We hear mostly about his mother. And apparently his mother lived with him and was quite wealthy. And someone had stolen, apparently, 1,100 shekels of silver from the mother, and she pronounced a curse on the thief, not knowing that she was cursing her own son. He was the thief. Now, these 1,100 shekels shouldn't be confused with 1,100 shekels each that each the Lord of the Philistines gave Delilah. For some reason, 1,100 shekels seems to be an interesting unit because it shows up, in the Samson narrative, but no connection. Anyway, verse 2, Micah said to his mother, "The 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from thee, about which thou cursest, and spakest thou also in mine ears, behold, the silver is with me. I took it." His mother said, "Blessed be thou of the Lord, my son." Now, she apparently was trying to offset the curse. See, she found his own son. Well, I guess she figures that if she blesses him, that should sort of offset the curse. At least that's a plan of neutralization. But notice, so we understand this guy, it was fear of the curse, not fear of the Lord, that motivated the son to confess that he was a thief here. But we get to verse 3, and when he had restored the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother said, "I had wholly dedicated the silver unto the Lord from my hand for my son to make a graven image and a molten image. Now, therefore, I will restore it unto thee." Yet he restored the money unto his mother, and his mother took 200 shekels of silver and gave them to the founder, who made thereof a graven image and a molten image, and they were in the house of Micah. Now, you should understand, this is an act of disobedience anyway to the Ten Commandments. Exodus 20, verse 4. But this reflects, and I think that's the intention here too, to understand just how depraved the people don't even understand that that this is ungodly. And now, this phrase in the Hebrew here of a carved image and a cast idol suggests like there's two objects of false worship: an image carved out of stone or wood, and then a cast idol made of some metal poured into a mold. Some scholars think that it gets into a grammatical issue, that they were combined some way. That's really not essential to our purpose. But we get in chapter 18, it seems to underscore the objects were clearly his. So he's got not just an idol, he's got a collection of them. It gets worse as we go. Verse 4, you restore the money and so on. In gratitude for the return of the money, so she dedicated part of the silver to the Lord in her mind and made an idol out of it. Do you see a contradiction there? See, not in their mind, that's the point. Now, 200 silver shekels is about several $1,000s. Big money. So, okay. The man Micah had a house of gods or idols and made an ephod and a teraphim and consecrated one of his sons who became his priest. So he really has no concept of the Torah, of the Aaronic priesthood, or what have you. So now an ephod is a priestly garment. It's an object of worship and for a priest to wear. And some of the idols were teraphim, and that's a special kind of idol, but we don't have to get into that too much. In those days, there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes. We've heard that phrase accounted again and again and again in the book of Judges. It's the idiomatic phrase that characterizes that period. I think here it's really clear that what the writer is trying to communicate is things were bad news. Not just because there was no king, that's part of it, there's no leadership, but also because everybody wrote their own rules. Everybody did what's right in their own eyes. And again, one of the things just to underscore here, there are 4 characteristics all through the book of Judges. That there was no king in Israel, that everyone did what was right in their own eyes, that there was a disparagement of the word of God, and they were in bondage. And I never realized it until we got into the study that the book of Judges is a book of prophecy. Look at our land today. Look at the world today. The number one problem is there's no king in Israel. There will be. He's coming. The other thing is everyone does what's right in their own eyes. Value relativism. You have your truth, I have mine. Wrong. Wrong. God writes the rules. And the absence of the word of God in our society and so forth. And as a result, we are in bondage. Now, just to pause here for a minute, can you imagine any family more confused than this one? They think they're worshiping the Lord. That's in their mind. You get that impression. But they've got idols. They got false priests. They do it and so forth. Now, they've managed in just these few verses, probably all in one day virtually, to break 7 of the 10 commandments and not feel the least bit guilty about it. They thought they were serving the Lord by all this. Son didn't honor his mother, but instead stole from her, then lied about it. First he coveted it, and then he stole it, of course. And according to Colossians 3:5, coveting is idolatry. We don't think of it that way. But Paul makes that very clear. Then he lied about the whole enterprise until the curse scared him into repenting or confessing. Then he broke the 5th, 8th, 9th, and 10th commandments. He broke the 1st and 2nd by having a shrine of false gods in his home. And according to Proverbs 30, verse 8 and 9, when he stole the silver, he broke the 3rd commandment and took the name of the Lord in vain. Breaking 7 of the 10 commandments without even leaving home. Now, that's an accomplishment. You know? And furthermore, the mother didn't deal with her son's sins. His character certainly didn't improve by the way she handled it. She was corrupt herself, so how could she correct? Now, Micah did not only have a false shrine, he ordained his son to be a priest. Certainly, he should have known that God had ordained the family of Aaron to be their priests, the only priests in Israel. Anybody that was outside Aaron's family that served as priest was ordained in the Torah to be killed. God took it seriously. And of course, because they didn't take the word of God seriously, their home is a place of confusion. I won't ask for a show of hands, but I suspect maybe not quite so grossly, but many of us are not in that much better shape. Okay, verse 7. We introduce another player here. There was a young man out of Bethlehem, Judah, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite. And he sojourned there. Well, now that's interesting. How can he be out of the family of Judah, yet be a Levite? There's a lot of scholastic discussion about that. I'll come back to that point. The man departed out of the city from Bethlehem, Judah, to sojourn where he could find a place, and he came to Mount Ephraim, to the house of Micah, as he journeyed. So this is a guy that presumably is a Levite, looking for a job. You see a contradiction there. Micah said unto him, Whence comest thou? He said unto him, I'm a Levite of Bethlehem, Judah, and I go to sojourn where I may find a place. Well, that's interesting. Now, the fact that he's from the family of Judah could be an allusion simply that he's from that region. At the same time, there's some other aspects I'll come to as we go into this. He will be in chapter 18 identified as the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh. Well, there you got a problem, because Gershom was of Aaron, not of Manasseh. But in the Hebrew text, there's the only difference between Moses and Manasseh is a little nun. And the nun is placed above the text. And the speculation by some scholars is that some scribe added that so that he wouldn't look like a son of Moses, because they didn't want a son of Moses to be an idolater. Well, the scribe that did that should have done his homework and remember that Aaron was an idolater at one time. But so there is some confusion as to was he a Levite or not. The general consensus is that he was a Levite, and what we're dealing here is with a well-intentioned textual manipulation. But it's not essential to our thing. He obviously, though, apparently was a Levite, and he was probably there because the people were not supporting the tabernacle and the ministry the way they should be, or he would have had plenty to do. Why would you want to live in one of the Levitical cities if you're going to starve? So he's on his way looking for a job. One of the first signs of apathy, spiritual apathy, is a failure of the people to support the work of God. And that's obviously also what's going on here. So he came to Mount Ephraim, to the house where Micah lived. And Micah said to him, Whence comest thou? He said to him, I'm a Levite of Bethlehem, Judah, and I go to sojourn where I may find a place, a job in effect. Okay? The last map we saw highlighted Israel, especially from the point of view of their enemies, the Ammonites in the east, when we were talking about Gideon and all of that, and the Philistines in the west, when we talk about Samson and all that, last few chapters. Here we're going to focus really on the same hometown, roughly, Zorah, and just north of that is the hills of Ephraim. We're going to migrate all the way up to the top tip, but we'll take that as it comes. There's a region along the coast that was allocated under Joshua to the tribe of Dan. But they're not cutting it there. They're not able to sustain themselves, so they're on the prowl for an alternative. And that's what part of chapter 18 is going to focus on. And we're going to go all the way up to Laish, at the very top of the map, virtually on the border of Lebanon. Anyway, this guy's looking for a job, so Micah said unto him, Dwell with me, and be unto me a father and a priest. And I will give thee 10 shekels of silver by the year, and a suit of apparel, and thy victuals. So the Levite went in, gave him a job offer. Instead of seeking the mind of the Lord, what is Jonathan doing? He's just out on the prowl himself. He's a hireling, trying to find a place to work. And he's really, in effect, abandoning any calling to be a servant of God. Again, this is an idiom, not just about a guy, but the times in which he was dwelling. Just one guy. But I think one of the messages of Judges is that one guy can make a difference. All through the book of Judges, one guy makes a difference. Here's a guy that could have but didn't. And instead of being available to God, he was agreeable only to men. He found a comfortable home and clothing and food, and so he took on. So in the next verse, and the Levite was content to dwell with a man, and the young man was unto him as one of his sons. Micah consecrated the Levite, and the young man became his priest and was in the house of Micah. Then said Micah, Now know I that the Lord will do me good, seeing that I have a Levite to be my priest. The Levites were called to assist the priests in the tabernacle, to teach the law to the people, to be involved with the sacred music. And Jonathan gave all that up to be an idolater. He didn't work for the living God. He worked for Micah and his idols. So he's offered more money and prestige, apparently, and gave thanks for that. We'll see that in verse 19 later. And now he's going to assist his new employer by stealing his goods, but that's coming. See, whenever you have a hireling ministry, you got problems. The church needs true and faithful shepherds. They're not there for personal gain, who will stay with the flock to feed and protect them. True shepherds don't see their work as a career or a better job when the opportunity comes. They stay where God plants them and don't move until he sends them. That's part of the background here. And as we sort of go through this, we have to recognize that God must really be grieving when he sees churches worship the idols of ministerial success, statistics, buildings, square footage, what have you. The sad part of this whole story is that now Micah thinks that he had the favor of God because there was a genuine Levitical priest in the house as private chaplain. By the way, all of that is forbidden in the Torah. Numbers 3:10 forbids this. He practiced a false religion, worshiped false gods, and threw Jehovah in for good measure. All that, of course, will be taken from him shortly. So let's jump in and take a look at chapter 18. I'm going to call this confusion in the society. We're going to upscale one. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and in those days, the tribe of the Danites sought them an inheritance to dwell in. For unto that day, all their inheritance had not fallen unto them among the tribes of Israel. Under Joshua, by lot, they all had been allocated areas, as you may recall. Dan was almost virtually on the seacoast, but it's an area they were having a tough time, subduing to themselves. And so they've got a problem. If the people had forgotten their following the Lord, certainly they also were no longer obeying God or governing it the way God had set up. Every man did what was right in his own eyes, it said. And so the result is competition and confusion. Now the tribe of Dan, of course, descended from Jacob's fifth son, born to Rachel's handmaid Bilhah, back in Genesis 30. It was not a large tribe, but it was given a choice territory when the tribal boundaries were assigned. That's all back in Joshua 19, if you want to dig into your notes, so you can make note of that and dig into it. God, by the way, if you look at Acts 17, verse 26, God also assigns the area of nations. Most of us overlook that, but it's clearly there in Acts 17, 26. But clearly, certainly in the case of Israel, God had ordained certain areas for certain tribes, but the Danites are going to ignore that. They're being pushed by the Amorites, and they're also being pushed by the Philistines, and they're not able to defeat or dispossess the enemy, probably because of their spiritual condition, among other things. So they coveted somebody else's land. They're on the prowl to see what land they can just take over, and they're willing to do it in a violent manner. That's what's really up here. In verse 2 of chapter 18, the children of Dan sent of their family 5 men. You can look at them as spies or a reconnoitering or intelligence gathering group. 5 men from their coasts, men of valor, from Zorah and from Eshtaol. Remember, that was the hometowns we talked about earlier. To spy out the land and to search it. And they said unto them, go, search the land. Who, when they came to Mount Ephraim, to the house of Micah, they lodged there. So these 5 guys are on the prowl, and they pull up with their Harley-Davidsons at the house of Micah and just invite themselves in. It's interesting that they run into this young man. When they were by the house of Micah, they knew the voice of the young man, the Levite. What that really means is they recognized his dialect. They're puzzled. They're in Ephraim, and he has an accent probably of Judah. And they turned in thither and said unto him, who brought thee thither? And what makest thou in this place? What hast thou here? He said to them, thus and thus dealeth Micah with me, and hath hired me, and I am his priest. Now, the minute they have a priest, and it's on somebody else's payroll, they want to take advantage of that. Said unto him, ask counsel, we pray thee, of God, that we may know whether our way which we go shall be prosperous. These guys are not shy. They're just trying to find out what's going on here. And you can call it probably the level of superstition. I wouldn't call it the area of faith. And Jonathan, like any good hireling, will tell them what they want to hear. Everybody knows the way you fill a church from the pulpit is to tell people what they want to hear. So Jonathan's no fool. He's figured that out. Okay. And my tongue is in my cheek on this whole thing, of course. And priest said unto them, go in peace before the Lord is your way wherein ye go. So he gives them a blessing, in effect. He encourages them. You would kind of wonder what basis he gave them that kind of encouragement. Jonathan seems awfully confident. The outward success of their mission didn't correspond with the Lord's revealed plan for the tribe of Dan. In other words, the tribe of Dan should have known what God had in mind. They're going to go their own way, and they're going to reap the results, as you'll see shortly. The tribe of Dan is going to indulge in some conquests at the northern tip of Israel. The tribe of Dan will also be the tribe through which idolatry will enter the northern kingdom under Jeroboam. And there are many scholars that believe that the reason, when you get to Revelation chapter 7, there's a mystery. Because in Revelation chapter 7, you've got the 12 tribes. You got 12,000 evangelists ordained or sealed from each of the 12 tribes. But if you go through that list, the tribe of Dan isn't there. You look at that list of Revelation, there's no tribe of Dan there. You say, that's why I thought there's 12 tribes. Well, not exactly. There's really 13. See, remember, Joseph had 2 sons, and his sons, which were Jacob's grandchildren, Jacob adopted. So there's really 13 tribes, technically. So if you want 12 tribes and you want all of them, you take the tribe of Joseph as a tribe. If for some reason you want to leave one of the 12 out in your list, for example, military order, because the Levites were exempt from military duty, you'll discover in the marching order there's still 12 tribes. Because you've got Levites out, but you've got Ephraim and Manasseh, the 2 tribes of Joseph, taken as separate tribes. Now in Revelation 7, it turns out you want 12 tribes, but you don't want Dan in there. If you look carefully, you'll find that the tribe of Dan is missing. In fact, most people miss there's another tribe that's there but not named. Yes. See, the other tribe that was involved with idolatry, just like Dan was Ephraim. When we get to Revelation 7, you'll find the list. It mentions Manasseh, and then it mentions Joseph. Well, if you already have Manasseh, all that's left of Joseph is Ephraim. So it's obviously Ephraim that he's talking about. But the Holy Spirit chooses not to mention him directly. But he's there. So a little list in Revelation 7 deserves some careful study. There's some other aspects to the tribe of Dan. I'll hold off for now. We'll take it a little bit later. 5 men departed. They came to Laish. Now Laish, that's so casual. Laish is at the northern tip. It's virtually Lebanon. There's a lake that's even north of the Sea of Galilee, a small one. It's even north of that. It's really up there. 5 men departed, came to Laish, and saw that the people there were therein how they dwelt carelessly, after the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and secure. There was no magistrate in the land that might put them to shame in anything. And they were far from the Sidonians and had no business with any man. There's an isolated community, which means they're helpless. They're peacefully living there, minding their own business. The Danite says, goody, 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 goody. And they came unto their brethren to Zorah, back down south in Eshtaol, which is right on the border. It later becomes on the border of the Philistine country, but at this point it's the border of the Danites. And the brethren said to them, well, what say ye? By the way, to give you a feeling for this, these 5 guys had traveled 100 miles north from their encampment at Zorah to Laish. The town was about 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee and about 27 miles east of Tyre, which is on the seaboard, the Mediterranean. So it's inland, about 27 miles, and about 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. Peaceful people, no treaties with anybody, no one protecting them, unsuspecting and secure is what the Hebrew implies. It was isolated from the Sidonians, the nearest settlements, by a range of mountains. It's isolated from Syria by Mount Hermon and a range of mountains. And no close. So it's a perfect target for the warlike Danites. So the brethren said, okay, give us a report. What'd you guys find? And they said, arise, that we may go up against them. For we have seen the land, and behold, it's very good. And are ye still? Be not slothful to go and to enter to possess it. In other words, let's go, guys. Let's not dally. And when ye go, ye shall come unto a people secure and to a large land. For God hath given into your hands a place where there is no want of anything that is in the earth. So they're pretty excited about the prospects here. Now, their theological affirmation is a little debatable. But how often are we all guilty of that? You know, it's available, so God must be blessing us. Be careful. And they went from thence of the family of the Danites, out of Zorah and out of Eshtaol, 600 men appointed with weapons of war. And they went up and pitched in Kiriath Jearim in Judah. Therefore they call that place Manahdan unto this day. Behold, it is behind Kiriath Jearim. This is this campsite. By the way, Manahdan is simply the camp of Dan, is all it means. And that's, by the way, where Samson later will sense the work of God in his life. And, when you really understand what the Danites were like, you begin to respect, you're a little less hard on Samson. I mean, he didn't have it all together either, but he's a far cry from these guys. Anyway, they went up, and they passed thence into Mount Ephraim and came to the house of Micah. So between Zorah and where they started, the house of Micah is up in the Ephraim hills on the way going north. So they stopped by this house of Micah again. Then answered the 5 men that went to spy out the country of Laish and said unto the brethren, do you know that there is in these houses an ephod and teraphim and a graven image and a molten image? Now therefore consider what ye have to do. This is what we would call a target-rich environment, okay? They turned thitherward and came to the house of the young man, the Levite, even unto the house of Micah, and saluted him. And the 600 men appointed with their weapons of war, which were of the children of Dan, stood by the entering of the gate. Now that's got to be impressive. That's got to be impressive. And the 5 men that went up to spy the land, they went up and came thither and took the graven image and the ephod and the teraphim and the molten image. And the priest stood in the entering of the gate with 600 men that were appointed with weapons of war. And these went into Micah's house and fetched the carved image, the ephod, the teraphim, the molten image. And then said the priest unto them, what are you doing? They said to him, hold thy peace. Lay thy hand upon thy mouth and go with us. Be to us a father and a priest. Is it better for thee to be a priest unto the house of one man, or that thou be a priest unto a tribe and a family in Israel? Hey man, you can broaden your ministry here. Here's a real opportunity. Must be of the Lord, of course. And the priest's heart was glad, and he took the ephod, the teraphim, the graven image, and went in the midst of the people. So he was converted to their purpose, I suppose. With 600 armed men outside your gate, you're not going to put up much resistance. But so they turned and departed and put the little ones and the cattle and the carriage before them. When they were a good way from the house of Micah, the men that were in the houses near to Micah's house were gathered together and overtook the children of Dan. His neighbors are, upset about this. They cried unto the children of Dan. They turned their faces and said unto Micah, what aileth thee that thou comest with such a company? He said, you have taken away my gods, which I made, and the priest, and you're gone away. And what have I more? What is this that ye say unto me? What aileth thee? This is too funny for words, really. He's worshiping gods that need his protection. You stop and think about it. Do you see a contradiction there? A little backwards. There are lots of scriptures come to mind, but we'll just keep moving here. Now, they obviously were anticipating that Micah was going to chase them because they put the valuables, the children, all that up in front of them. So the army was the rear guard because they knew the attack would be coming from behind them when Micah was chasing them. When Micah says here, what have I more? This really reveals his bankruptcy, his spiritual bankruptcy. They take a few of these trinkets and he feels stripped naked. As if they're, again, it reveals the folly and the tragedy of being without a true and living God. Idolaters worship the gods they carry. Christians worship a God that carries them. Big difference. Well, they took the things which Micah had made, and the priest which he had, and came unto Laish, unto a people that were quiet and secure. And guess what happened? And they smote them with the edge of the sword, and burnt the city with fire. And there was no deliverer, because it was far from Sidon, and they had no business with any man. It was in the valley that lieth at Beth Rehob. And they built a city and dwelt therein. So the Danites take over. Now, it's kind of interesting. Back in Genesis 49, Jacob, as he dies, prophesies on each of the 12 tribes. There's a little riddle. One of them is longer than the others, but when he gets to Dan, Jacob is leaning on a staff, but he's just before he dies. He says, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path, that biteth his horse's heels, so that his rider shall fall backward. Boy, how descriptive, how descriptive. It's interesting that he mentions the serpent, but the very next verse he talks about salvation. I've waited for thy salvation, O Lord. It's almost in juxtaposition of Genesis 3:15, where God declares war on Satan and speaks of the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. Seed of the woman becoming thus from that day on a title of Jesus Christ. And of course, everybody forgets there's two seeds. Seed of the woman and seed of the serpent. And that's exactly what Dad did in a cruel and crafty, they literally, oh wait, there's also another one, Deuteronomy 33. Moses also predicts over each of the tribes. In Deuteronomy 33, some people call it the Song of Moses. And of Dan he said, Dan is a lion's whelp, and he shall leap from Bashan. And that's exactly what they did. They leapt from the Mount Hermon to this valley to wipe out Laish and become, if you look on Bible maps, you'll see it called the city of Dan. Its original label was Laish. We had the opportunity once to be up there. It's really up north, virtually in Lebanon. And one of the strange things that's there, it's very rare, is a mud gate. Mud gates were a style of building, but they didn't survive because they were water soluble, pretty much. But in this particular one, there's some kind of cave-in so that for some strange, peculiar, unique circumstances, there is a preserved mud gate that goes back to the days of Abraham. Breathtaking to realize that this gate is the gate that Abraham himself probably went through. The mud gate at Laish. Very interesting. They called the name of the city Dan after the name of Dan, their father, who was born unto Israel. Howbeit the name of the city was Laish at the first. And the children of Dan set up a graven image. No surprise. And Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh. Again, that's where this little nun is there. It's a textual problem. He and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. Now, this is another mystery that students wrestle with, because what captivity we're talking about. It certainly isn't a captivity that we usually talk about, Assyrian or Babylon. That comes much, much later. There's either a captivity that is not recorded, or it's an allusion to the Philistine oppression, which is yet future from this event. And they set up Micah's graven image, which he had made all the time that the house of God was in Shiloh. The tabernacle was at Shiloh in these days. Now, a couple of other things about the tribe of Dan. The more you study the tribe of Dan, and the more you discover these things, first of all, I mentioned Dan is missing from the lists of tribes in Revelation. I traced this back, by the way, this idea, there's a concept that the Antichrist will come out of the tribe of Dan. And that concept goes all the way back to Irenaeus in his writings against heresies. He draws that belief from a passage in Jeremiah 8:16 in the Greek, in the Septuagint. From Dan shall we hear the noise of his swift horses. So for that reason, and some others I'll come to, Irenaeus suspects that the Antichrist will come out of Dan. I'm not saying, don't misunderstand me, I'm not saying he will, but you'll hear that echo through some of the literature, that the Antichrist, somehow this tribe of Dan is pretty sinister stuff. And that's one of the reasons it goes back to Irenaeus, one of the early church fathers. But there's something else. When you start studying the Bible, you discover something else about Dan. I mentioned his name is omitted from the list in Revelation 7. It's also omitted in 1 Chronicles, the first 10 chapters of Chronicles. 1 Chronicles, 10 chapters, is a detailed genealogy of all the patriarchs and their descendants. It goes on and on and on and on. You wade through 10 chapters of stuff. But you miss something if you're not careful. The tribe of Dan isn't there. He's omitted from the list. Is that an oversight? Or is the Holy Spirit doing something? Well, there's a couple of other places that most commentators miss too. There are other genealogies. One is in Genesis 46. When you get to Dan, it sounds like the name of his sons is Hushim. And most Bible lexicons, the only place the word occurs, and they suspect that must mean a descendant of Dan. But if you do some homework on this, it turns out the word really means to grow dark, to have a dark color, to grow dim, to make dark, cause darkness hide, conceal, obscure, confuse. It's as if the Holy Spirit, he's going through all these different patriarchs. This tribe, and here are all their sons. Here's all their sons. Dan, those guys. And goes on. Now, it doesn't list his descendants. He obviously had descendants. These descendants are what's going on here in Judges 18. They're not listed in Genesis 46. You get to Numbers 26. In verse 42, the same thing occurs. Right in the middle of all these genealogies of the patriarchs, and you get to Dan, it says Shuham. It's translated once. It means the son of Dan, or progenitor of the family. That's an inference. That's not what the word means. You know what the word means? It means pit digger. It comes from shuach, which means to sink down or bow down or sinks down or sunk down. You discover the Bible from cover to cover seems to take it out on the tribe of Dan. Several major lists, he's not even there. Places where he does show up, it's with the back of the hand. Those guys with a derogatory label. It's all because he was the means that idolatry entered the land, because they set up a graven image, and that's going to lead to, it gets worse and worse and worse. The golden calves get set up there under Jeroboam's in 1 Kings 12, 2 Kings 10, and the shrine that apparently Moses' grandson Jonathan set up there, it and Bethel are the two golden calves that are principal in the whole narrative of the northern kingdom, until the Assyrians wipe out the whole northern kingdom. Now, so you don't get confused, some members of the tribe of Dan stayed down south where they belonged, the earlier settlers, and they had the Philistines as their western neighbors at that time, and that's where Samson and all that stuff takes place. The southern remnant of Dan apparently gets absorbed into Judah. The northern tribe of Dan gets taken captive by the Assyrians. So much for Judges 17:18. You know, somebody has said there's only three philosophies of life in today's world. First is, what's mine is mine, I'll keep it. Second one is, what's yours is mine, I'll take it. And the third is, what's mine is yours, I'll share it. Which one did the tribe of Dan embrace? Your second and third guesses don't count. Okay. So tribe Dan, first tribe to adopt the idolatrous system of religion. And even though the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant and all of that was at Shiloh, they preferred their images and idols and so forth. And Jeroboam I would build golden calves there and so forth, on it goes. So ends this little bit, and I finished early so I could sneak in something else. I'd like to take you on a little excursion. This is speculative. It's way out in left field, but it's kind of fun. The first world leader was a guy by the name of Nimrod. He was the first world dictator, Genesis 10 and so forth. And I'm going to suggest the possibility that the guy we call the Antichrist, this final super leader that has 33 different labels in the Old Testament, 13 in the New, we call him the Antichrist. I'm going to call him for this discussion Nimrod 2. Okay? We all know about the 10 horns, the 10 kings that will be part of the revived Roman Empire. He is an 11th. He's the little horn of Daniel 7, the little horn of Daniel 8. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just read Daniel 7 and Daniel 8, and you'll discover when there's 10 horns, 11th comes up, knocks down 3 of them, and takes over the whole bunch. So another title, one of the several titles for the Antichrist, is the little horn of Daniel 7, or the little horn of Daniel 8. Now, there is a strange passage in Micah 5, which talks about the end times. And the phrase Micah uses, when the Assyrian shall come into our land. Satan has had 7 super kingdoms. In Revelation 12, verse 3, it summarizes these. It appeared another wonder in heaven, behold, a great red dragon. Who's the great red dragon? Satan. Having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. And it's generally, most scholars seem to recognize that seems to appear to that there are 7 primary empires in the Bible. The first is Egypt, goes back to the oldest. Then Assyria rises to power. Assyria not only rules for, I think, 3 or 4 centuries, it strangely disappears. It gets taken over by Babylon. Babylon was just one of the cities within the Assyrian Empire, but it grows to be powerful and takes over the whole thing. What's interesting is that Assyria disappears. When Alexander the Great comes along later, he walked over and didn't even know it was there. It wasn't rediscovered until the 18th century. They discovered Nineveh and began to realize, there it is. One of the mysteries about Assyria is, why did it disappear so quickly? It's a mystery. Anyway, after Assyria comes Babylon. Most of us know about Babylon because it's so prominent in so much of the biblical literature. After Babylon comes Persia, Greece, and then Rome in two phases, what I'll call Rome 1 and Rome 2. And we know that because Rome 2 speaks of 10 kings or 10 horns in Daniel 2 and Daniel 7, Revelation 13, Revelation 17, all deals with these 10 horns. So it's probably familiar. I'm going to call these last 5 Daniel's 4 plus 1. What I mean by that is Daniel clearly sees 4 empires in Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. But Rome he sees in 2 distinct phases. It's iron and then iron mixed with clay. When you get to the 4th, in Daniel 7, there's 4 creatures, but the 4th creature goes into a second phase. So most scholars recognize that Rome 1 and Rome 2 are 2 distinct phases, separated by centuries, obviously, of the same, somehow in some respects, the same empire. So most of us know Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. We don't dwell in Egypt and Assyria because that was all past when Daniel did all his writings, of which we get so much insight. Well, we get to Revelation.
And at the Vatican, they never comprehend how those cities constitute one of the greatest open conspiracies of all time. There, reproduced in all of their glory and right before the world's eyes, is an ancient talisman diagram. It's based on the history and cult of Isis, Osiris, and Horus, including the magical utilities meant to generate the deity's return. The primeval concept, especially that of sacred domes facing obelisks, this is something that was designed in antiquity for the express purpose of regeneration, resurrection, and apotheosis, for deity incarnation from the underworld to the earth's surface through union of respective figures. The dome, the ancient structural representation of the womb of Isis, and the obelisk, the ancient representation of the erect male phallus of Osiris. That layout, as modeled in antiquity, exists today on the grandest scale at the heart of the capital of the most important government, most powerful government on earth, the United States, as well as in the heart of the most politically influential church on earth, the Vatican. Now, given this fact and the pattern provided by the Apostle Paul and the Apocalypse of John, the book of Revelation, that the end times would culminate in a marriage between political, that is Antichrist, and religious, that is false prophet, authorities at the return of Osiris Apollo, it really does behoove open-minded researchers to carefully consider these prophecies in stone, as it defines the spiritual energy that's knowingly or unknowingly being invoked at both locations with potential ramifications for the year 2025 and beyond. The U.S. Capitol has been called the Mirror Vatican due to the strikingly similar layout and design of its primary buildings and streets. Now, that's no accident. In fact, America's forefathers first named the capital city Rome. But the parallelism between Washington and the Vatican is most clearly illustrated by the Capitol building and dome facing the obelisk known as the Washington Monument, and at St. Peter's Square Basilica in the Vatican by a similar dome facing a familiar obelisk, both of which were, according to their own official records, fashioned after the Roman Pantheon, the circular domed rotunda dedicated to all pagan gods. Now, this layout, a domed temple facing an obelisk, is an ancient alchemical blueprint that holds significant esoteric meaning. For those who may not know, the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C. is historically based on a pagan Masonic temple theme. Thomas Jefferson, who shepherded the anti-Christian Roman Pantheon design, wrote to the Capitol's architect Benjamin Latrobe, defining it as, quote, the first temple dedicated to embellishing with Athenian taste the course of a nation looking far beyond the range of Athenian destinies, end quote. The Athenian Empire was, of course, first known as Ossyria, the kingdom of Osiris. In 1833, Massachusetts Representative Rufus Coyote agreed, writing, quote, we have built no national temples but the Capitol, end quote. Now, to understand what these statements may soon mean for the future of the world, one needs to comprehend how these apparati, the dome and the obelisk facing it, facilitate important archaic and modern protocols for invigorating prophetic supernatural alchemy. In ancient times, the obelisk represented the god Osiris's missing male organ, which Isis was not able to find after her husband brother was slain and chopped into 14 pieces by his evil brother Set. The story involves a detailed account of the envious brother and 72, that's an important number, conspirators tricking Osiris into climbing inside of a box, which Set quickly locked and threw into the Nile. Osiris drowned, and his body floated down the Nile River where it snagged on the limbs of a tamarisk tree. In Byblos, Isis recovered his body from the riverbank and took it into her care, but in her absence, Seth stole the body again, and this time chopped it into 14 pieces, which he threw back into the Nile. Isis searched the riverbank until she recovered every piece except for the genitals, which had been swallowed by a fish. Isis recombined the 13 pieces of Osiris' corpse and replaced the missing organ with a magic facsimile, an obelisk, which she used to impregnate herself during the very first raising of Osiris ceremony, in which she called forth the seed of the dead god from the underworld up through the magic device, thus giving rise to Osiris again in the person of his son, Horus. Now, this legendary ritual for reincarnating Osiris formed the core of Egyptian cosmology, as well as the Rosicrucian Masonic dying and rising myths, and was fantastically venerated on the most imposing scale throughout all of Egypt by towering obelisks representing the phallus of Osiris and domes representing the pregnant belly of Isis, including at Karnak, where the upright obelisks were vitalized or stimulated from the energy of the masturbatory sun god Ra shining down upon them. In Egypt, where rituals were performed to actually raise the spirit of Osiris into the reigning pharaoh, political authority in the form of divine kingship or theocratic statesmanship was established, later reflected in the political and religious doctrine of royal and political legitimacy, or the divine right of kings, who supposedly derived their right to rule from the will of God, with the exception, in some countries, that the king is subject to the church and to the pope. But this meant, among other things, that the Egyptian pharaoh enjoyed extraordinary authority as the son of the sun god Ra and the incarnation of the falcon god Horus during his lifetime. At death, Pharaoh would become the Osiris, the divine judge of the netherworld, and on earth his son and predecessor would take his place as the newly anointed manifestation of Horus. So each generation of pharaohs provided the gods with a spokesman for the present world and for the afterlife, while also offering the nation divinely appointed leadership. And yet the observant listener may wonder, was there something more to the pharaoh's deification than faith in ritual magic? Well, the cult center of Amun-Ra at Thebes may actually hold the answer, as it was the site of the largest religious structure ever built. the Temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak, and the location of many extraordinary, mysterious rites. The great temple, with its miles of walls and gardens, the primary object by the way of fascination and worship by the nemesis of Moses, the Pharaoh of the Exodus, Ramses II, was the place where each Pharaoh reconciled his divinity in the company of Amun-Ra during the festival of Opet. Now, the festival was held at the Temple of Luxor, and it included a procession of gods carried on barges up the Nile River from Karnak to the temple. The royal family would accompany the gods on boats, while the Egyptian laity would walk along the shore, calling out and making requests of the gods. But once at Luxor, the pharaoh and his entourage would enter the Holy of Holies, the Temple of Isis, the domed belly, where the ceremony to raise the spirit of Osiris into the king would be performed. The raising of Osiris ceremony by the magicians of Egypt. And don't forget, these men were very powerful, as they were able to mimic almost all of the miracles conducted by God through the hand of Moses during the Exodus. But in any case, it was truly believed that Pharaoh at that moment would be transmogrified into a living deity, Osiris in flesh. Outside, large groups of dancers and musicians would wait anxiously, and then when the king emerged as the born-again Osiris, the crowd would erupt in gaiety. And from that day forward, the pharaoh would be considered to be, just as the God ciphered on the Great Seal of the United States will be, the son and spiritual incarnation of the supreme deity, the all-seeing eye of Horus, Apollo, Osiris, above the unfinished pyramid on the Great Seal, represents that event. Now fast forward to today, and at the inauguration of every American president, across town at the House of the Temple, the modern Egyptian magicians, the Freemasons, Scottish Rite, 33rd degree, are conducting the raising of Osiris ceremony to call the seat of Osiris Apollo from the underworld through the Washington Monument obelisk, where it magically emits into the U.S. Capitol dome, while America's new leader is standing there accepting his role as the living representative of Osiris. This is done in anticipation of the day when events are going to surpass parity, and the beast that was and is not shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition, the Greek word Apollo. And they that dwell on earth shall wonder whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not, and yet is. Revelation 17:8. For a few adepts of history and secret orders, this DC ritual is deliciously staged, as even the term inaugurate is from the Latin inauguratio, and it refers to the archaic ceremony by which the Roman augurs or soothsayers would approve a king or a ruler through omens as being sanctioned by the god Jupiter, the same entities whose prophecies on the Great Seal herald his upcoming challenge to Yahweh Jehovah for heavenly supremacy, while his son Apollo Osiris seizes authority over the world in a final pagan golden age. As pointed out in my new book, Zeitgeist 2025, the dome where U.S. presidents stand during their inauguration, and where they lie in state for their spirit to rise into the apotheosis overhead to join George Washington in the kingdom of Osiris at death, alone is an unparalleled magical construct that openly hides the most formidable ancient supernaturalism meant for regeneration of Apollo Osiris. In fact, I would go so far as to say it is a satanic antichrist plagiarism of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ that I believe is going to play a role in the healing of Antichrist after he experiences a deadly head wound in Revelation 13:3. Note that the 1865 apotheosis of Washington, painted by Greek-Italian artist Constantino Brumidi, is visible through the oculus of the dome in the rotunda, and it bears anything but Christian symbols. It's filled with Greco-Roman gods to whom Thomas Jefferson dedicated the United States. The very term apotheosis means to become a god, or revived eternal being. Now, in this depiction, Washington is becoming Osiris of the afterlife. The gods in the painting surrounding Washington are depicting helping the founders establish a more perfect union, as in the New Atlantis scheme that I go into the details of in Zeitgeist 2025. Directly beneath the apotheosis are 72 pentagrams, forming a sorcerous gateway used by secret society members and occultists to bind and loose the 72 fallen angels that reside over the heathen nations. You can learn more about that in Psalms 82, Deuteronomy 32, and so on. Finally, under the floor of the rotunda is the U.S. National Crypt, where an empty tomb resides. He is not here, for he is risen. This is where I argue that Antichrist will be taken after his head injury, and the Freemasons will conduct the raising of Osiris ceremony, at which time he will be transmogrified into the living incarnation of Osiris Apollo. Now, there is more to the Capitol Dome, Antichrist plagiarism of the life of Christ, that I go into in Zeitgeist 2025 than these aspects of the building's design might infer. But these points of interest clearly reveal how the architects imagined a dark parody of Jesus. How so? Well, as Jesus died and rose into heaven, so Washington rises to become the Osiris in the top of the U.S. Capitol Dome. As the 72 pentagrams in the Capitol Dome are used to control the 72 cosmo craters over the nation, Jesus too confronted the 72 fallen watchers, from the base of Mount Hermon to his visit in the underworld and final ascension into heaven, whereby he proclaimed in Revelation 1:18, "I am he that liveth and was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore," which is a clear denunciation of the Osiris dying and rising God myth that was so popular during his first advent. He goes on, "Amen, and have the keys of hell." This is the word Hades, the names that the Greeks gave to Osiris, and of death, end quote. It's important because Osiris was the lord of the underworld in Greek myth who controlled who possessed the keys to the 12 gates of Egyptian afterlife. Much has been written by historians within and without Masonry as to the relevance of the number 72 and the alchemy related to it. For instance, in Kabbalah, Freemasonry, and Jewish apocalyptic writings, the number 72 equals the total of wings that Enoch received when he's transformed into the powerful angel Metatron. You could see 3 Enoch 9:2 for more on that. And this plays an important role for the Brotherhood, as Metatron was also known as the angel in the whirlwind, who was enabled as the guiding spirit over America during George W. Bush's administration for the purpose of directing the future and fate of the United States, as was also prayed by Congressman Major R. Owens of New York before the House of Representatives on Wednesday, February 28, 2001. But in the context of the Capitol Dome and the 72 stars that circle Washington's apotheosis in the womb of Isis, the significance of this symbolism is far more important. In sacred literature, including the Bible, stars are symbolic of angels, and within Masonic Gnosticism, these 72 powerful entities, reflected in the 72 conspirators that controlled Osiris's life in Egyptian myth, currently administer the affairs of earth under Satan, the god of this world, according to 2 Corinthians 4:4. Experts in the study of the divine council believe that, beginning at the Tower of Babel, the world and its inhabitants were disinherited by the sovereign God of Israel and placed under the authority of 72 angels. These angels became corrupt and disloyal to God in their administration of those nations, according to Psalms 82. These beings quickly became worshipped on earth as gods following Babel, led by Nimrod, Gilgamesh, Osiris, Apollo. Consistent within this tradition, the designers of the Capitol Dome, the Great Seal of the United States, and the Obelisk Washington Monument circled the apotheosis of Washington with 72 pentagram stars. They dedicated the obelisk 72 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and they placed 72 stones on the Great Seal's uncapped pyramid, above which the prophetic eye of Horus, Osiris, Apollo stares. These three sets of 72, combined with the imagery and occult numerology of the Osiris obelisk, the Isis dome, and the oracular Great Seal, are richly symbolic of the influence of Satan and his angels over the world, according to Luke 4, 2 Corinthians 4, Ephesians 6, and other scripture, with a prophecy towards Satan's final earthly empire, the coming Novus Ordo Seclorum, or new pagan golden age. Now, in order for the inevitable worship of Osiris to be reestablished on earth, the 72 demons that govern the nations have to be controlled. Therefore, they are set in magical constraints on the Great Seal, the Washington obelisk, and the pentagram circles around the apotheosis of Washington in order to bind and force the desired effect. In The Secret Destiny of America, famous Freemason Manly P. Hall noted as well that the 72 stones on the pyramid on the Great Seal correspond to the 72 arrangements of the Tetragrammaton, or the four-lettered name of God in Hebrew. He wrote this: "These four letters can be combined in 72 combinations, resulting in what is called the Shemhamphorish, which represents in turn the laws, powers, and energies of nature," end quote. Now, folks, the idea that the mystical name of God could be invoked to bind or release those supernatural agents, or powers and energies of nature, as Hall called them, is meaningful creed within many occult tenets, including Kabbalah and Freemasonry. This is why the 72 stars are pentagram-shaped around the deified Freemason George Washington. Medieval books of magic, or grimoires such as the Key of Solomon and the Lesser Key of Solomon, not only identify the star systems Orion, or Osiris, and Pleiades, Apollo, as the home of these powers, but applies great importance to the pentagram shape of the stars for binding and releasing their influence. Adept Rosicrucians and Freemasons have long used these magical texts, the Key of Solomon and the Lesser Key of Solomon, to do just that. Modern people, especially in America, may view all of these symbols used in this magic, especially the dome representing the habitually pregnant belly of Isis, and the obelisk representing the erect phallus of Osiris, as profane or pornographic. But they were in fact ritualized fertility objects, which the ancients believed could produce tangible reactions, properties, or manifestations within the material world. The obelisk and dome, as imitations of the deity's male and female reproductive organs, could, through government representation, invoke into existence the being or beings symbolized by them. And that is why inside the temple or dome, prostitutes representing the human manifestation of the goddess were also available for ritual sex as a form of imitative magic. Through such imitative sex, the dome and obelisk became energy receivers, capable of assimilating raw essence from the rays of the sun, which in turn would draw forth the seed of the underworld Osiris. The seed of the dead entity would, according to the supernaturalism, transmit upward from out of the underworld through the base or testes of the obelisk and magically emit from the tower's head into the womb or dome of Isis, where incarnation into the sitting pharaoh, king, or president would occur during what Freemasons also call the raising of Osiris ceremony. In this way, Osiris could be habitually born again or reincarnated as Horus and constantly direct the spiritual destiny of the nation. Something most people do not know and will be shocked to learn in my new book is that the Freemasons even constructed a symbolic seed of Osiris at the Washington Monument obelisk. If an anatomically correct phallus is placed over the Washington Monument, right in the testicular section beneath a manhole cover, where it should be, is a miniature 12-foot tall obelisk hidden just beneath the surface of the ground, representing the seat of Osiris. The number 12, of course, is the biblical and occult numerology for perfect government. In this case, that new world order over which Osiris Apollo is going to reign, when the beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition, rises at the end of time to oversee the dawn of a new golden age. This metaphysical phenomenon of deity resurrection involving mystical seed reminds of the messianic proto-evangelium promise, and I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel, Genesis 3:15, which for occultists was countered by Nimrod Semiramis and was central to numerous other ancient cultures, especially developed in Egypt, where Nimrod Semiramis were known as Osiris and Isis. And in Ezekiel chapter 8, the children of Israel set up the obelisk or image of jealousy. You can see that in verse 5, facing the entry of their temple, just as the dome faces the obelisk in Washington, D.C., and in the Vatican City, and were condemned by God for worshiping the sun, or Ra, while weeping for Osiris, or Tammuz. The familiar Masonic figure of the point within a circle is the symbol of this union between Ra, Osiris, and Isis. The point represents Osiris's phallus in the center of the circle or womb of Isis, which in turn is enlivened by the sun rays of Ra, just as today at the Vatican, where the Egyptian obelisk of Osiris sits within a circle, and in Washington, D.C., where the obelisk does similarly, situated so as to be the first thing that the sun, or Ra, strikes as it rises over the capital city, and which, when viewed from overhead, forms this magical point within a circle known as a circumpunct. The sorcery is further amplified, according to ancient occultic beliefs, by the presence of the reflecting pool in Washington, D.C., which serves as a mirror to heaven and a transferring point for those spirits and energies. And just what is it that the spirits see when they look downward on the reflecting pool in Washington? They find a city dedicated to and built in honor of the legendary deities Isis and Osiris, complete with the 13 gathered pieces of Osiris, America's original 13 colonies, the required obelisk known as the Washington Monument, the Capitol Dome of Isis for impregnation and incarnation of deity into each pharaoh or president, and last but not least, the official government buildings erected to face their respective counterparts and whose cornerstones, including the U.S. Capitol Dome, were dedicated during astrological alignment related to the zodiacal constellation Virgo or Isis, as required for the magic to occur. The information that I just shared with you is only the tip of the iceberg of what I reveal in my new book, Zeitgeist 2025. In fact, much of what I uncover in this book is too hot for mainstream platforms like YouTube and Facebook and would immediately be censored.
Raised a lot. We've raised over $350 million. It's a beautiful room, a big room. I don't have any plan to call it after myself. That was fake news. Probably going to call it the Presidential Ballroom or something like that. We haven't really thought about a name yet. Well, could even be more than that. Probably, possibly, assuming we can do that. You know, we're building the Ark, and maybe we use it for the Ark. Looks like we might. You know, we're going to be building the Ark, and we've raised a lot of money for the ballroom, so maybe we'll put... The Ark is going to be incredible for Washington, D.C., so maybe we use it for the Ark.
A heavy sound in the air, a whisper from the past, echoes of a city that built its throne to last. Harlots in the shadows, kings beneath her reign, celebrating darkness, basking in the pain. Babylon, oh Babylon, heart of a fallen dream. You soared so high, you danced in crimson gleam. Pride poured like wine, flowed through the streets, but your sins piled up. Now fate's your final beat. The prophets cried out, their voices filled with woe. A city once bright, now lost in the undertow. Your grandeur has faded, your glory's in the past. The hammer of justice swings, your shadows can't outlast. Falling, falling is Babylon the Great. A cry shook the heavens, sealing your fate. Rebellion won't last, nor prideful embrace. The Lord's written word, it will always take place. Kings bow down low as your empire declines, feasting on the bones of of society to the throne of grace. No rebellious empire can put God in disgrace.